Today, we're looking into the case of a 16-year-old girl who told friends she was going to meet someone she'd been talking to online. She said it was just for the night, but she never came home. Days later, police would uncover something far more disturbing than a simple runaway case: a locked game room, a missing ring, and a witness who claimed they saw a man calmly tossing black duffel bags into a restaurant dumpster before sunrise. What really happened inside that quiet house on Bay Ridge Avenue? Who were the people she trusted enough to stay with, and why didn't she ever leave? The answers would horrify a small coastal town and leave investigators asking if the entire thing had been planned from the start. Gulf Shore Bay isn't the kind of place you'd expect to hear about on the evening news. It's small, sleepy, the sort of coastal Florida town where everyone waves, whether they know you or not. Locals joke that nothing happens there unless the weather's involved. But in February of this year, something did happen, and no one's quite sure how to talk about it. Her name was Luna Hargrave, 16, a young mother. Dropped out of school the year before to care for her baby girl. She lived just outside the bay with her grandmother, who worked nights cleaning medical offices. Most people didn't notice Lena, and if they did, they assumed she was another statistic, young, tired, and stretched too thin. No one expected her to vanish. Not like this. On the night of February 14th, Valentine's Day, Lena told a friend she was going to meet someone. She didn't give a name, just said she'd met him through an app. Her tone was casual, hopeful, even "just dinner," she typed. He's older but chill, not creepy. The friend didn't push. She should have. The man's name, as investigators would later discover, was Damian Stroud, 35. On paper, his background was patchy but not alarming. A few run-ins with the law for minor assaults, a bar fight in Sarasota, a drug possession charge that was dropped. Nothing that screamed danger. But what wasn't on paper is what truly mattered. Lena met him at a house on Bay Ridge Avenue, a modest, single-story home with sun-worn blinds and a basketball hoop that hadn't seen a ball in years. A second woman answered the door. Her name was Vivian Calder, 37. She told Lena Damian was in the back and offered her something to drink. That was the last confirmed moment Lena Hargrave was seen alive by anyone outside that house. 2 days passed. Lena didn't return. Her grandmother thought she was staying with a friend. The baby was still with the neighbor she often used for overnight help. Texts to Lena's phone went unanswered. Her social media went quiet. At first, no one panicked until her friend reached out to the grandmother and asked if Lena was back. She wasn't, and she hadn't checked in. By the third day, the grandmother called police. A report was filed, but the label "possible runaway" slowed everything down. Officers drove by the address once. No one answered the door. The lights were on. They left a card in the mailbox. The next morning, before sunrise, a sanitation worker in the nearby town of Ruskin made a complaint. He'd been emptying bins behind a long-shuttered Popeyes when he noticed a foul smell, something stronger than trash. It was coming from one of the restaurant's commercial dumpsters. Inside were 2 large black duffel bags and what looked like blood leaking from the seams. The discovery didn't make the news right away. It took time for forensics to confirm what they were looking at. But what they found inside was enough to halt everything else. The remains weren't intact. They were partial, cleanly cut. Evidence of dismemberment, according to one investigator who later spoke off the record. But there was something else. Something that made the case spiral into something darker. A fingerprint. Small, female, still preserved on a piece of plastic sheeting used to wrap what was left of the torso. It matched Lena Hargrave. Suddenly, this wasn't a runaway case anymore. It was a homicide, and detectives were no longer knocking on doors, they were pounding on them. That quiet little house on Bay Ridge Avenue, police returned with a warrant. What they found inside raised more questions than answers. A locked game room in the basement, a stained piece of carpet cut out and replaced, and in the trash outside, used duct tape, a cue ball with hair on it, and a half-torn piece of fabric that matched Lena's hoodie. But Damian Stroud wasn't home. Neither was Vivian Calder. Both had disappeared. For now. By the time police broke into the Bay Ridge Avenue house, Damian Stroud had been gone for almost 12 hours. Neighbors claimed they saw him loading a truck around midnight. No headlights, no noise, just the sound of heavy bags being dragged down the front steps and something metallic clinking against the tailgate. He didn't leave in a rush. He left like a man following instructions, carefully, quietly. Inside the house, the rooms were too clean. Furniture polished, sink empty, not a single dish out of place. But beneath that surface-level order, something felt wrong. An investigator later described it as a house that had been wiped down, but not lived in. The walls were bare. The fridge was empty except for bottled water and a single lemon. There were no photos, no mail, no toothpaste in the bathroom, except for one room. A heavy wooden door, padlocked from the outside, led to the basement. Police had to cut it open. What they found was surreal. The room was windowless, painted dark green. The air inside stale and dry, like the vents had been shut for weeks. Against one wall sat a pool table, the felt still marked with chalk, and the faint impression of where a ball had once rested. Nearby, a half-empty pack of zip ties lay open beside a stained towel. One investigator found a foldable metal chair tucked behind a utility shelf, its seat warped and cracked in the middle. The floor? Concrete, but part of it was sticky. And in the corner, behind the boiler, something truly disturbing. A roll of plastic wrap torn, used, and beside it, a strip of duct tape still clinging to a single blonde hair. It was Lena's. But what truly rattled investigators was what wasn't in the room. There were no personal items, no evidence of a struggle, no fingerprints besides Damien's. And yet, every instinct told them that this room wasn't for recreation. It was for containment and control. Meanwhile, across the bay, an anonymous tip had led detectives to a motel on the edge of Clearwater. The room was registered under a false name, but the ID used at check-in had a familiar face, Vivian Calder. She wasn't alone when they found her. A man, unknown to investigators, claimed to be her cousin. He had no record, no prior involvement, but the way he looked at the officers when they mentioned Luna Hargrave made them suspicious. Vivian didn't resist arrest. She didn't cry. She didn't even ask why. She simply said, "I figured you'd get here eventually." Back at the station, she spoke carefully. Not like someone in shock, but like someone working from a script. Her words were cold, deliberate, and laced with a strange kind of logic. She was already planning to leave, Vivian told them. We didn't do anything she didn't agree to. When asked what she meant by we, Vivian hesitated, then leaned in and whispered, "It was Damien's idea." But Damien was still missing. His phone had last pinged off a cell tower outside Ocala, more than 100 miles away. His truck had been abandoned behind an abandoned gas station, wiped clean. Detectives found a single receipt in the glove compartment dated 2 days prior for a hardware store purchase. Garbage bags, bleach, gloves, and 2 rolls of plastic wrap. It wasn't a panicked escape. It was premeditated. While investigators raced to locate him, forensic teams went back over the Bay Ridge house with fresh eyes. In the crawl space, they discovered a hidden camera system, 4 cameras wired into corners of the game room, all disabled, but not before uploading footage to a local drive. The hard drive had been removed. Only the mountings remained. Whatever happened to Lena down there had been recorded, but no one knew where those recordings were. For Lena's family, the delay in answers was unbearable. Her grandmother, who had assumed for days that her granddaughter had simply run off and would come home eventually, could barely speak during interviews. The baby, was placed into protective custody. No one on Lena's side had the resources or legal guardianship to take her. And for those who had brushed off Lena's disappearance as just another runaway story, guilt was beginning to set in, especially for the officers who had stood on Damien's porch the week before, knocked twice, and left. By the time the story of Luna Hargrave reached the wider public, it was already too late to ask her what had really happened. But in the days immediately following her disappearance, her name was just one more entry in a police database, tagged with the code 16RUN, a routine designation for teenage runaways. No immediate threat. No Amber Alert. No urgency. The truth was, Lena had vanished quietly. There were no witnesses, no forced entry, no phone call. Her last known location, according to the app she used to message Damien, was Bay Ridge Avenue, but that data was never checked until long after she'd been filed away and forgotten. And for nearly 3 days, no one, not the police, not her family, not even her friends, realized she was already gone. The first hint came from someone no one expected, Kayla Monroe, a classmate from Lena's old school. They hadn't spoken in months, but Kayla remembered getting a late-night voice note from Lena on Valentine's Day. It was short, just a muffled laugh. the clink of glass, and Lena saying, "This place is weird, but whatever. He's kinda cute." Kayla didn't listen to it until days later, when Lena's name started circulating in a neighborhood group chat. By then, the laughter in that recording sounded wrong, tight, nervous, almost like she was trying to convince herself. The investigators eventually got that recording, but by then, the house had already been scrubbed. The timeline was closing in, and what little digital trail Lena had left was evaporating fast. Her messages to Damien had all been deleted. The dating app she used had no record of their chat, likely wiped from his end. What the police did find was a note saved in her drafts folder. It was never sent. "I think I messed up. This isn't what I thought. She's watching me while I sleep." It was time-stamped to 41 a.m., February 16th. The same night, Lena's phone pinged off the Bay Ridge cell tower one last time before going dark. There's something chilling about realizing how close the truth had come to surfacing and how easily it was ignored. The delay in classifying Lena's case as a possible abduction would later be cited in internal reviews. Detectives assigned to other cases at the time admitted they didn't push for more information. Her grandmother wasn't persistent enough, they claimed. No signs of forced entry, no clear suspect, no evidence of foul play. But what they didn't see, what no one saw, was that the danger didn't come from outside the house. It was waiting inside it. The mistake cost them time, precious time, and Damien Stroud used every minute of it. By the fourth day, news outlets picked up the story, first local, then statewide. The words "missing teen" flashed beneath school photos of Lena smiling in oversized hoodies and secondhand jackets. Social media lit up. Hashtags started circulating, comments filled with regret, blame, speculation. Some said she shouldn't have gone. Others asked why the police hadn't acted sooner. But none of it changed the fact that she was still gone, and no one could say where. Until the dumpster. That discovery rewrote everything. Lena wasn't missing. She was murdered, dismembered, disposed of like trash. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know, who were Damien Stroud and Vivian Calder? Their names hadn't appeared together before. No marriage records, no shared lease, no bank accounts. But they had one shared connection: the house. Damien had inherited it from an uncle who died the year before. Vivian? She had moved in 6 months earlier, listed on no lease, no utilities, nothing official. But neighbors saw her every day, walking the dog, carrying groceries, washing Damien's truck. They thought she was his wife. She wasn't. She was something else entirely. As investigators peeled back their lives, they found a shared history of displacement. Damien had bounced between jobs and cities. Vivian had vanished from her last known address in 2022 after a domestic disturbance that ended in a restraining order against her. What were these two doing together? And how did Lena Hargrave get caught in their orbit? One detective, speaking anonymously, put it best: this wasn't some random act of violence. This was curated, staged, controlled. The more they dug, the clearer it became. Lena hadn't walked into danger by accident. She'd been lured. By the time Lena Hargrave realized something was wrong, it was already too late to leave. At first, the house on Bay Ridge didn't feel threatening, just strange, too still, too quiet. Damien had told her that his roommate, Vivian, kept to herself. Lena didn't question it. She'd been in worse places. And compared to the chaos of home diapers, dishes, her grandmother's silence, this felt like a break. Damien was polite, affectionate in a way she hadn't expected. He cooked dinner the first night, let her pick the movie, told her she looked older than 16, said she had an old soul. But by the third night, the air had changed. Vivian watched her constantly, not with curiosity, but calculation, like someone waiting to be proven right. Lena would catch her standing in doorways, arms crossed, saying nothing, just watching, measuring. Then came the ring. It was Damien's mother's, or so he said. Gold, modest, with a dull red stone. He kept it in a little dish beside the sink. Lena hadn't touched it. She barely noticed it. But on the morning of February 20th, it was gone. Vivian brought it up over toast. Casual, cold. Funny how things go missing when people stay too long. Damien didn't say anything. He just stared at Lena. His smile, once easy, even boyish, was gone. Lena laughed it off at first. She thought it was a joke, but when she offered to help look, neither of them moved. Vivian sipped her tea. Damien just kept staring. "You should check your bag," Vivian said. "I already did," Lena replied. "Check again." That moment, Lena would later write in a journal page found in her backpack, was when she first felt afraid. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't touch her. Not yet. But the shift was palpable. The house had rules now unspoken. Sudden. Suffocating. That evening, Lena asked to leave. Damien told her it wasn't safe to go out that late. He'd drive her home in the morning. She nodded. What else could she do? Her phone had no signal. Or maybe it had been cut. She couldn't tell. The next morning, Damien said his truck wouldn't start. "Battery's dead," he claimed. "You're not in a rush, right?" Another day passed. No messages in or out. Vivian had locked the front door and put the key on a hook Lena couldn't reach. The windows were nailed shut, painted over from the outside. When Lena tried the back door, it opened to a tall wooden fence and a lockbox mounted on the gate. She was trapped, and they never had to say it out loud. That night, Vivian came into Lena's room holding a tray of food: chicken, mashed potatoes, a red cloth napkin folded just so. She set it down, then placed something else beside it. The ring, clean, polished, sitting there like an accusation carved in gold. "We found it," Vivian said. "Where?" Lena asked. "Does it matter?" She left without another word. From that point on, Lena was no longer a guest. She was a problem. A question that needed answering. A mistake that had stayed too long. The surveillance camera cables in the basement, they hadn't been disconnected yet. But Lena didn't know they existed. She didn't know the house had been wired from the inside, recording every movement she made, especially in the basement. It was Damien who told her to go down there. Said he needed help moving something. She followed without thinking. A moment of habit, of obedience. She didn't see Vivian locking the top of the stairs behind her. She didn't notice the change in Damien's eyes until they reached the bottom, until he said, too softly, "This is where things get difficult." The room smelled of bleach and old metal. There were no windows, no clocks, no sense of time. Only that pool table, the green felt surface, and a long-handled cue leaning against the wall. Lena asked what they were doing. He didn't answer. The game was already in motion, and she was the piece being moved. At first, Lena didn't scream. The moment the basement door clicked shut behind her, she froze. It wasn't fear yet, just confusion. She turned to see Damien standing at the foot of the stairs, his hand still resting on the railing. "It's just a test," he said, almost apologetically. "A test for what?" she asked. "Trust." The lights in the basement buzzed faintly overhead, fluorescence that flickered like failing nerves. The walls were painted a deep, suffocating green. Cold concrete hugged the floor. A drain sat near the center. Metal grating rusted around the edges. In the far corner stood a rolling cart. Duct tape, a roll of plastic wrap, latex gloves, tools that didn't belong in any game room. And then there was the camera. Lena spotted it too late, mounted just above the utility shelves, its red light blinking faintly, like the heartbeat of something watching. That's when she knew. This wasn't about the ring. It had never been about the ring. Damien moved slowly, deliberately. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just kept talking, as if this were all part of some uncomfortable conversation he'd been rehearsing in his head for weeks. "You think I'm the bad guy," he said, "but you came here. You stayed." She tried to argue, but the words caught. Her voice didn't sound right in that room, too thin, too small. He handed her a cue ball. "Do you trust me?" She didn't take it. From the top of the stairs, Vivian called down, "Just tell her. She deserves that much." That's when the camera stopped blinking. Whatever came next wasn't meant to be recorded. Damien moved in close, the cue ball still in his hand, now cradled like something sacred. He whispered something Lena couldn't make out. Then he forced it into her mouth. She choked immediately, reflexively, but his grip was firm, years stronger. Vivian descended the stairs without hurry, holding a wide roll of plastic wrap like a ribbon at a party. Lena struggled, eyes wide, limbs thrashing against the concrete. There was no screaming, only muffled gasps, desperate kicks, a final scraping sound as her heel caught the edge of the metal drain. Then stillness. When Vivian later described it to police, her voice was strangely calm. It wasn't violent. She just stopped. They kept the body in the basement for a day. Damien wrapped it meticulously, layer after layer of plastic. Vivian cleaned the room with bleach, scrubbing down the pool table, rinsing the grating of the floor drain. No blood was visible, not even a drop. But it was never about what could be seen. It was about what remained. In their panic or arrogance, they missed one thing: the ball. The same cue ball Damien had used. Hair was still trapped beneath the tape they'd applied after, just a precaution to keep it from rolling. And Lena's DNA clung to it like a whisper. The dismemberment happened the following night. A serrated kitchen knife. No saw. Damien worked with surgical precision, each motion methodical, as though he had done this before or studied how. The duffel bags were packed in silence. 3 of them. One held only clothing. The other 2, heavier. They loaded them into Damien's truck at 3:14 a.m. Neighbors would later admit they heard something metal dragging, a thud against the curb, but they dismissed it. Just the sound of someone cleaning out their garage, they said. The drive to Ruskin took under an hour. The Popeyes had been shut for months. The dumpster sat in a shadowed alley between a pawn shop and a tire repair yard. Damien wore gloves. Vivian watched from the passenger seat, expression blank. He lifted the bags with care, dropped them in without a word. They drove home before the sun rose. No headlights, no music, just silence and a plan that, for a moment, seemed like it might actually work. But there's a truth about crimes like this, something Vivian forgot to consider. You can clean a floor. You can wipe a phone. You can scrub a pool table until it gleams like it was never touched. But no matter how hard you try, you can't make a person disappear without leaving something behind. In the early morning of February 23rd, the city of Ruskin stirred beneath a pale blue sky. Nothing in the air hinted at the horror sealed inside the grease-stained dumpster behind the shuttered Popeyes. Seagulls circled lazily overhead. A sanitation truck rolled into the alleyway, its crew bleary-eyed, thinking only of coffee and the long route ahead. That was when the driver, Antonio Vega, caught the scent. It wasn't just decay. He'd smelled that before. This was different, sharper, like copper and rot and bleach mixed into one. He approached the dumpster with a practiced grimace, expecting spoiled meat or medical waste. What he found was far worse. Inside, 2 black duffel bags sat unnaturally still. One had been zipped shut tight. The other, slightly open, revealed something pale beneath a folded hoodie. At first, Antonio thought it was a mannequin, a prank, until he saw the hand, small, soft-looking fingers, curled, as if reaching for air that had long since vanished. He dropped his coffee, called his supervisor. Then he threw up in the parking lot. Within 30 minutes, the alley was sealed off. Crime scene tape unfurled like yellow ribbons of warning. Detectives from Hillsborough County arrived wearing gloves and unreadable faces. A coroner's van idled nearby. Inside the duffels, they found the remains of a teenage girl. No ID, no phone, no purse, just fragments of who she had been. What stood out most was the red ring, a cheap imitation garnet, wedged into the fabric of a backpack. Investigators photographed everything, took samples, swabbed for DNA, and one name began to echo between their radios: Luna Hargrave. She had been reported missing only hours earlier by her grandmother Dottie, who'd finally worked up the courage to call. Lena had never vanished like this before, never left her baby behind. Now her story was no longer a missing persons case. Now it was something far more sinister. Damien and Vivian had returned to normal life as if nothing had happened. They cleaned the house, stripped the basement, painted the walls a cheerful sunflower yellow. Vivian burned Lena's notebook in the backyard fire pit. Damien deleted every message from his phone. But you can't delete scent. Cadaver dogs, brought in 2 days later, hit instantly on the basement floor. And you can't delete fingerprints from the inside of a plastic wrap roll. Vivian had worn gloves. Damien had not. What undid them, though, wasn't physical evidence alone. It was arrogance. Vivian, who had once worked part-time at a local pharmacy, asked her manager if the store's dumpster was deep enough to hide a body in. She had laughed when she said it. But the manager remembered, especially after seeing her photo on the evening news. Detectives traced the Popeyes dumpster back to recent security footage from a pawn shop across the alleyway. Though grainy, the video showed Damien's truck idling at 3:14 a.m. and two figures unloading bags. 2 days later, they knocked on the door of 418 Bay Ridge Avenue. Vivian answered in a blue robe. Damien was still asleep. During the initial interview, Damien claimed Lena had stayed with them for only one night. Said she was skittish, probably ran off to be with some guy. He seemed relaxed, cooperative, even offered to show detectives the room she'd stayed in. But the basement had already been swabbed. A partial footprint had already been matched. The ring had already tested positive for Lena's DNA. And then there was the text. Buried deep inside Damien's phone was a single unsent draft. She wanted to leave. I told her she couldn't. It's not my fault what happened. He hadn't deleted it. He'd simply never hit send. Detectives read it aloud during his second interview. That was the moment his jaw twitched. The moment the false calm snapped. It was Vivian who broke first. She asked for coffee during the interrogation. They brought her a styrofoam cup. No cream. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered she was just a girl. He said it'd be fast. No plea deal was offered. There was no need. She'd placed herself at the scene, and worse, she'd confirmed intent. Within 72 hours, both Damien and Vivian were charged with first-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, desecration of human remains, and obstruction of justice. Bay Ridge Avenue became the street no one wanted to drive down anymore. Neighbors stopped making eye contact. And behind the old rust-colored mailbox at 418, a single red rose appeared one morning left by someone who never rang the doorbell. Long before the duffel bags, before the basement, before the cue ball, there was a journal. Luna Hargrave had never been one for long-winded essays or dramatic flair. Her handwriting was small, cramped, like she didn't want to take up too much space. But the words raw, trembling, unfiltered held a power even she likely didn't realize at the time. The notebook was discovered weeks after the arrest, tucked inside a floral diaper bag her grandmother had kept in a closet. Dottie had been too grief-stricken to go through Lena's things, too afraid that even the smell of her granddaughter's lotion might shatter her. But one night, when the house was too quiet and her grief too loud, she unzipped the bag. Inside, pacifiers, a crumpled receipt from a diner, and the notebook. Most pages were scrawled with reminders, formula schedules, baby milestones, songs she wanted to sing when her daughter got older. But scattered in between were pieces of something else, something colder, something foreboding. Vivian keeps saying, "I'm lucky. I don't feel lucky." They lock the door when they go out. Even when I'm inside, he keeps touching my hair. I want to shave it off. I told them I wanted to leave. They laughed. There's a camera in the basement. I think it's on. Dottie turned the pages with shaking fingers. There was no punctuation on some entries. Others ended mid-sentence, as though Lena had stopped writing because she heard someone coming. One passage stood out. He said I looked like someone he used to know. Said I'd be better once I let go of my old life. Said love isn't always about comfort. Sometimes it's about control. I smiled, so he wouldn't know I was scared. Detectives read every line. Prosecutors, too. And when the time came, those pages were presented to the grand jury not just as evidence, but as voice. Lena's voice. Unfiltered, undeniable, unforgiving. The most damning evidence, the surveillance tape from the basement, was never shown to the public. It was sealed under court order, described only in transcripts. What the tape revealed was cold, calculated, and final. Damien had turned the camera off before the fatal moment, but he'd forgotten something. There was a secondary motion sensor on the backup security system. It recorded 30 silent minutes. No audio, no clear image. Just flickers of motion, a shadow moving across concrete, a figure kneeling, something small sliding across the floor. Investigators enhanced it frame by frame. In one frozen second, Lena's face was visible. Her eyes locked on the camera. There was no scream, only a look of betrayal, of realization, of goodbye. In court, prosecutors referred to that moment as the look that broke the room. Even the jury turned away. It began on a cloudy Monday in courtroom 3B of the Hillsborough County Judicial Center. Rain tapped against the windows like a metronome, slow and steady, as if the sky itself was keeping time with the story about to unfold. The state of Florida versus Damien Knox and Vivian Corset. Vivian entered first, hair tied back, lips pale, eyes darting toward the floor as if trying to find a crack wide enough to fall into. She wore a charcoal gray suit that didn't fit quite right, like she was playing a part she didn't understand. Damien came in second. No shackles, no emotion, just that same unnerving calm, like someone who had accepted long ago that he would not be understood and no longer cared. The courtroom was packed. Local reporters filled the back rows. Lena's grandmother, Dottie, sat in the front beside a court-appointed victim advocate, clutching a photo of Lena in both hands. Her knuckles were white. Her lips never moved. She never cried. Not once. The prosecutor, a woman named Delia Hart, approached the jury like a surgeon, not eager, not angry, but methodical. "This case," she began, "is about a child who trusted the wrong people, and a man and woman who exploited that trust until there was nothing left of her but silence." She laid out the evidence without theatrics. The journal, the footage, the text draft, the basement paint job. She spoke of Lena as a daughter, a mother, a teenager trying to get her life back together. She was not perfect, Delia said, but she was trying, and they didn't let her finish trying. When the defense spoke, they took a different tone. Vivian's lawyer leaned heavily into doubt, claimed Lena had a history of instability, that her own writings showed confusion, not captivity. He painted Vivian as a woman manipulated by a man with darker urges. "She didn't kill Lena," he said softly. "She tried to protect her, but she was too afraid to stop what was already in motion." Damien's attorney, a lean man with ice gray eyes, simply said, "There is no murder weapon. There is no witness. There is only a story told by the dead, interpreted by the living." And in that eerie hush, the trial began. When Lena's journal was read aloud in court, the room seemed to shrink. Entry by entry, her words spilled out, not dramatic, not accusatory, but hauntingly plain, as if she had already accepted her fate and was merely documenting it. "Vivian asked me if I ever thought about disappearing. I said yes." She smiled and said she'd help. Gasps came not from the gallery, but from jurors. Later that day, the prosecution presented 3D renderings of the basement before and after the cleanup. They walked the jury through the evidence. Bleach traces under new paint, scratches on the floor where the mattress had been dragged, fibers from the hoodie found in the duffel. A forensic technician held up a sealed exhibit bag. Inside, the red ring, the one still streaked with Lena's blood. On the 12th day of trial, Damien Knox shocked everyone by choosing to testify. He took the stand with steady hands, said Lena had wanted to stay longer, said she'd become obsessive, said he'd never touched her, except to protect her from herself. When asked about the text found on his phone, the one he never sent, his mouth curled slightly. She was confused. She said strange things. That message wasn't about guilt. It was about frustration. Delia Hart asked one question in response. "Do you believe Lena Harrow is dead?" Damien looked at the jury, then said, flatly, "I believe she chose to leave this world." Those 9 words changed everything. They weren't part of a defense. They were part of a delusion. 2 days later, the state rested. Vivian's team hesitated. There was talk she might plead out mid-trial. Instead, she broke. In the hallway outside the courtroom, she collapsed into a chair and whispered to a deputy, "It wasn't supposed to happen like that." She agreed to testify against Damien in exchange for life without parole. Her confession, though redacted for the jury, was read into court records. He said Lena reminded him of someone from before, someone who hurt him. He said we could start over, just the 2 of us, if we clean the slate. I thought he meant talking to her. I didn't know God. I didn't know until I saw the bag. The jury deliberated for just under 5 hours. They returned stone-faced, eyes red. Guilty. Damien Knox was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Vivian Corset, already bound to her plea, was remanded to a Florida correctional facility for the rest of her life. When the gavel fell, the rain had finally stopped, but no one in that room felt any lighter. Justice had been served, and yet, Lena was still gone. The case was closed. The courtroom emptied. Cameras moved on. Reporters filed their last stories. But for the people of Gulf Shore Bay, the aftershock hadn't finished tearing through the quiet corners of their town. It began subtly, like a tide pulling back. Parents started double-checking locks they'd never worried about before. Schools hosted impromptu assemblies about online safety. The church bulletin stopped printing Vivian Corset's name. And the old men at Edna's Cafe suddenly stopped debating politics and started whispering about that girl, the one with the baby. Even those who had never met Luna Hargrave felt as if they had lost someone, because they had. They'd lost the illusion that such a thing could never happen here.